Welcome to the Fremont for Everyone Candidate Forum for District 4. This is our third and last evening where we've gone through having forums for the various candidates that are running in Districts 2, 3, and 4. And tonight we're joined by Shao and Bryce Beckel, who are running for office in District 4. My name is David Bonaccorsi, and I'm here on behalf of Fremont for Everyone. And before we introduce the candidates, I wanted to introduce our organization to you. Fremont for Everyone was formed a couple of years ago as a grassroots organization called the Friends of the Housing Navigation Center. During the contentious period and right before the pandemic, when Fremont was considering its first HNC or Housing Navigation Center, we formed a grassroots organization to provide support to the council to do the right thing and have a housing navigation center in Fremont, which they approved of unanimously, and it's been open and running successfully. And since then, we have formed a partnership with California YIMBY, which is Yes in My Backyard, and we have become a more formalized organization. And our vision statement can be found at www.fremontforeveryone.com, and you get a sense of what the things we do. Our vision is that we advocate for inclusive, affordable housing for our residents and ensure that Fremont is welcoming of new neighbors while remaining a wonderful community for living closer to work, raising a family, and aging in place. A home for everyone. And what do? We advocate locally on behalf of the unhoused on general housing policy. And then we do that statewide with state legislation in Sacramento to advocate for legislation that will assist with issues of increasing affordability and addressing the needs of our unhoused neighbors who experience homelessness. We also participate in actively engaging in the Safe Parking Initiative at the various nonprofit organizations that have agreed to help that. We'll be having a question about that later on, as well as the mobile hygiene unit the city has had for our unhoused to help provide some amenities there. So there's a lot of volunteer effort, and I'm most proud of the fact that we've recently participated on our policy committee in working on the housing element, which is the 8-year plan from 2023 to 2031. That's going to go to the state that needs to get it certification, that we're trying to address our structural problems and addressing the needs for housing for those that are below market. A little bit about our ground rules tonight. I'm going to be introducing the candidates to be able to introduce themselves. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each of the questions. At some point, after we have asked some of our own questions, we're going to have a rapid fire round or lightning round of questions where we're really hoping to have yes and no answers. And we really encourage the audience tonight to come through with coming up with questions that are focused on issues that are important to Fremont for Everyone. Those issues concern, again, the need for more housing, particularly affordable housing or below market rate housing, as well as issues dealing with our unhoused neighbors in our community. So topics on other matters that may not be related to that may not be asked, and those questions will be based on the time that we have. There is one exception to the 90-second rule, because the candidates will also have closing statements at the very end, which is if one candidate were to call out the other candidate by name, that candidate at his option would have the chance to respond for 30 seconds. And if that candidate chose to then respond in kind, personally respond to the other candidate, that candidate would be given 30 seconds. We have a timer. We all can see, at least on the panel, how the time is doing. And I think with that, we're ready to launch into our quorum this evening. And so I'm going to be going back and forth between the two of you. And we agreed earlier I could refer to our candidates by their first names for ease of convenience. And so this evening, I'd like to begin with Bryce. Could you introduce yourself? You have 90 seconds to introduce yourself as to why you're running for Fremont City Council District 4. Go ahead, Mr. Beckel.
Hello, everybody. First off, thank you for Fremont for Everybody for hosting this forum this evening. I am a third-generation public school teacher. I am born, raised, and educated in the Bay Area. I grew up in Fairfield in the North Bay. I attended Sonoma State University for my Bachelor's of Music and Teaching credential. And in 2021, I completed my Master of Education in Educational Leadership. I currently am a music teacher at Mission San Jose High School. Previously to that, teaching middle school music in Milpitas. And so this gives me the unique opportunity to not only live, but also work in the district that I'm running to represent. For the past 5 years, I've served in a volunteer position as the Executive Director of Bands for the Tri-City Band Corps that provide free music lessons to hundreds of Fremont elementary school students, as well as performance and leadership opportunities to high school and junior high students, not only in Fremont, but also in our surrounding areas. And I'm also in my third term as the elected president of the Mission San Jose High School Parents of Universal Performers that work to fundraise and provide equipment and any needs to support music at Mission San Jose High School.
Thank you, Bryce. Yang, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Fremont for everyone for having me tonight to have another opportunity to introduce me to the community. I was born in China, came to this country and got my PhD degree in chemistry from Harvard University. 19 years ago, I moved into Fremont and called Fremont home. As many of the first generation immigrants, I try to realize my American dream here, like the goals of Fremont for everyone. I like to live close by to work. I like to send my kids to nice public schools in Fremont. And also, I hope eventually I can retire in this community. So because of that, I started to participate in all kinds of activities. For example, I got elected to the school board in 2014. And then eventually in 2018, thanks to many of you, I got elected into the city council. Housing, more specifically, affordable housing and homelessness is always a topic near dear to my heart. On top of my role as the city council member, I'm also the vice president of the commission at the Housing Authority of County of Alameda. Tonight, I'd like to just tell you more of what I have done in the past 4 years.
Thank you. Now I'm going to direct my first question to you, Yang, and then Bryce, you'll have a chance to respond second on this question. Currently, and really since March of 2020 with the onset of the pandemic, we've had a moratorium, first at the city level and then adopted by the County of Alameda that applies countywide, including Fremont, to basically ban evictions of residential tenants. Originally, it was conceived as a way of protecting people from relocating and being dislocated due to COVID. The Alameda County moratorium is still in effect. So my question really is, do you believe that the moratorium should end? And if you do, how soon? Or how soon do you believe it should have ended? And if you don't believe it should end, how long do you believe it should stay in effect? And so my first question is to you, Yang.
Sure. The moratorium as the temporary approach to respond to the pandemic did show its effectiveness in protecting people from becoming homeless during the pandemic. And as a temporary approach, I believe it has to have a time lifetime. So my answer to that is yes. Eventually, it has to be lifted. Otherwise, it's no longer temporary, it's permanent. To mind you that right now, only 2 counties in the whole state of California still has that moratorium. And even in the latest voting by 3-2, the county supervisors barely kept the moratorium. As we all know, we all come out of the pandemic. If you drive on the highway in rush hours, it will tell you that the economics is coming back. People are going back to work. Unemployment rate is really low. And right now, as a protective approach, it has already fulfilled its destiny. So in that case, I would think right now, as other counties, Alameda County should lift the moratorium right now.
Bryce,
I believe that the moratorium should stay in place for a more extended period of time. I personally have friends that live in the county, not necessarily in Fremont, but in the county, that are still behind on rent and are working to make that up. And so I believe that it should stay in place. Looking at Fremont specifically in District 4, according to city data, is 50% owned, 50% rent. And so we need to make sure that we are protecting those renters that are in the district. For lower income Fremont renters, 85% of them currently are facing a high housing cost burden. That's compared to 77% for the county. 21% are living in overcrowded conditions compared to 13% to the county. So I think it's important that we are doing everything we can to make sure people are remaining in their homes. And also households with extremely low to low income, 24% is 24% of all Fremont households, 46% of households that have at least one person with a disability, and 54% for elderly. So I think it's important that we are keeping the moratorium in place until we are seeing things become more stable. However, I do believe that if renters are in a position, they should still have to be required to show proof to their landlord. So that way the landlord is understanding of the situation and would hopefully be able to help them.
very good. Next question. Yang had mentioned that he had gone to Harvard's in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Bryce, in Cambridge, as well as in Berkeley, there has been an attempt to address the predominance of single-family residential zoning. We have in our various cycles that we have to meet state mandates have fallen well below our required allotment for below market rate housing. We only met 64% of our overall goals. We've exceeded our goals for moderate and above income units, but we've fallen woefully behind for below market rate, especially for very low and extremely low income rate housing. So to that extent, Cambridge and now Berkeley have adopted what are called affordable housing overlays virtually in the entire city. Our city has about 88% zone single family, which means that if your house burned down, you can't build an apartment, you can't build a duplex, you have to build another single family housing. So with that, Bryce, would you be open to considering what they're doing in Cambridge and Berkeley and having an affordable housing overlay throughout the city of Fremont?
I would be in favor of that. I think it's important that if a place of land does become available, that whoever owns the land, if they would like to build, if we're looking at, for instance, SB 9, where the division of lots, if somebody wants to take what used to be a single family home lot and build 2, 3, or 4 units on it, that would increase the amount of units that are available. That doesn't necessarily fix the affordable housing aspect, because those homes would likely, especially in Fremont, still be quite expensive, especially for the lower income families. But I would be in favor of people taking zoning for single family and turning those into multiple unit land.
Yang, you want Cambridge to come to Fremont?
Having living in Cambridge for almost 6 years, where I got married and had my son, I found the two cities quite different from each other. So what works or what might work in Cambridge may not work in Fremont. When I ran for city council in 2018, I already promised my constituents that I would try to my best to keep the neighborhood character intact, to protect the characteristic of the neighborhood. For example, if you look at Niles, which is a town of long history and with very unique one-story houses, it is unimaginable suddenly you have a high density, high rise apartment building out of nowhere. For that reason, we have to decide what will work in Fremont. As a matter of fact, we try to increase the in-lieu fees or so-called affordable housing fees to encourage developers to increase the percentage of affordable housing in Fremont. And as we are speaking now, 790 units are going to be very available very soon. And we have already built more affordable housing units than in the past.
Thank you. My next question, Bryce touched upon it, but it's going to be directed first to you, Yang. It's on SB 9 specifically. SB 9 allows, as a matter of right, if you meet certain conditions, to do a lot split. And the concept there is that you don't have to go through planning commission or city council, and it would increase the supply of affordable housing by design, even though it's market rate. And we can question whether that works in that regard. But currently, SB 9 does not override private deed restrictions called CC&Rs. And in Fremont, most of our communities that have been developed in the last 20 to 30 years have CC&Rs that restrict housing. Also, we have like Mission Ranch, we have design guidelines that we implemented to have certain setbacks and certain restrictions on what can be built. So Yang, do you support expansion of SB 9? Do you support SB 9? I guess is a basic question. If you had your way, would you try to overturn SB 9? But assuming, and if you support it, would you support its expansion? So it's a two-part question. Do you support SB 9? And if so, would you support its expansion so that it would override CC&Rs?
I support SB 9 first because we have our local senator, Bob Bonaccorsi, behind it as one of the authors for that. And we are very proud that he did that. Secondly, it specifically talks about protecting local control, which means that it's just not that we do whatever the state tells us to do. I believe as a representative of District 4 or more broadly for the city of Fremont, we city council members understand our city and the local needs. Therefore, when we try to implement SB 9, we can really respect all the uniqueness of certain neighborhoods and the homeowners association regulations and so on and so forth, so that we do not paint the whole city of Fremont with a broad brush. As I emphasized, SB 9 indeed protects local control, which is the whole purpose of the local government to really look into the situation, make necessary modifications of the general plan, and make sure while increasing the housing in general, we still protect the characteristics of the neighborhood.
Bryce, do you support SB 9? And if you do, would you support its expansion so that it would override private deed restrictions to make more land available to lot splits?
I do support SB 9. I do believe that there needs to be expansion on SB 9 so that it works with local CC&Rs to allow unit owners to make those decisions. However, I do not believe that SB 9 is addresses things such as affordable housing, as I said, because these houses, again, would not be as affordable as affordable housing itself. And those are different market segments, and so I don't think it would solve that problem, but I do support SB 9 and an expansion of it.
One of the key advocacy areas for Fremont for Everyone has been the Safe Parking Initiative. And even when I was on council, we first directed staff to look into safe parking. And the staff developed a 3-phase program. Phase 1, which has been currently implemented by council, allows for people that are underhoused or really unhoused in vehicles or in RVs to be able, if they're eligible, to stay at cooperating nonprofit organizations' parking lots and mainly religious institutions to have a safe place overnight. Phase 2 and phase 3 have not been implemented yet. Phase 2 would allow for providing support services, including job placement, where people are, whether it's on Christie Street or Stewart or wherever else in Fremont. We see an aggregation of RVs and other people that have been dislocated in their cars, the working poor. And phase 3 would be an aggressive approach to have a city leased or city-owned site where we would build amenities on site and have people be able to reside there off of our streets. So my question to you, Bryce, first is, do you support the Safe Parking Initiative, and would you support phases 2 and 3 in the foreseeable future, like in the next 2 to 4 year time horizon? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I do support the safe parking community. I do believe that we need to rapidly move to phase 3. And the reason for that is that the homeless population and the unhoused population in Fremont over the past 3 years has increased by 69%. While we've seen neighboring cities such as Hayward decrease theirs by about 22 to 23%. So that's from 2019, 608 people to 1,026 in 2022. And this is data from the city website. 66% of that population, is about 686 of those people, live in vehicles. That's 36% in cars or vans, 30% in RVs. And so I do believe that there is a rapid need to move into phase 3 because we are seeing a large portion of the unhoused population in Fremont living in their vehicles. And so I do believe that having a designated area for them with amenities such as shower facilities, bathroom facilities, and any other amenities that is deemed to be needed needs to happen very rapidly.
Yang, same question to you. Do you support the Safe Parking Initiative? I think you are on record having done so, but do you support going to phase 2 and phase 3 in the short term?
I'm very proud that my voting records showed that I supported not only the safe parking program, but also a series of decisions to help the unhoused population. Actually, David, you mentioned that I voted for the Housing Navigation Center. And right now, it has been shown to greatly help those unfortunate people to be permanently rehoused. In terms of the safe parking program, as we're speaking, now it's in the 8th month, and we have 4 participants, and the capacity is about 20 vehicles, comparing with 30% of the homeless people in Fremont that live in cars and 25% of the homeless people who live in RVs. Of course, that's a drop in a bucket. So eventually we are going to, as planned, expand to phase 2, phase 3. However, I would caution that we cannot just do it in a hurry because haste makes waste. Meanwhile, we will increase the services such as the inspection tagging services, weekly inspection services to make sure that people who live in cars and RVs live in a clean environment.
Thank you. Interesting, it just occurred to me, we have a former school board member and a current teacher in Fremont Unified School District here. So there's some commonality in your backgrounds. And I'm going to ask a question that has been prepared here. And I'm going to have a little bit of a nuanced part of it because I think you both understand the issue. Do you feel that housing planners need to consider their impact on neighborhood schools when deciding where to put new housing? And as a second part of that, what role can the city perform in trying to reduce the McKinney-Vento students that are in our schools? And that's a federally funded program where there are students that are considered underhoused. They may be unhoused, but in less than sustainable situations where they need to have extra funding. And we have a number of them, surprisingly, in Fremont Unified. So what efforts can you do in looking at the schools in terms of impact on new housing, if anything? And what do you think the city's obligation is to our Fremont Unified School District to reduce the McKinney-Vento population in our Fremont schools? And Yang, the question goes to you first.
Sure. As a former school board member, I'm very familiar with this topic. I remember when Patterson Ranch was built, I stood in the front line and protested along with fellow school board members and our superintendent, just to make sure that the developers, when they develop, they have the local school in mind. In the past, we did face the issue of overcrowdedness in local schools. Fortunately, right now, the enrollment has plateaued, but I still believe that in order to build a good relationship between the city and the school district, we should always work together when we come to the issue of new development and building of new schools. I'm very proud that I recently attended the ribbon cutting ceremony for Leela Burnhurst Elementary School, which is a very good example of the joint effort by the city and the school district. We should keep working along that line and make sure that not only we develop, we also make sure that the children that move in have school to go. And also by increasing the supply of affordable housing, we can reduce the unhoused or homeless students in the school district.
Bryce.
I do believe that it is critical that when it comes to new developments that the city is looking to approve, that they look at the surrounding areas to see the services that are there. That includes anything from gas stations to are there supermarkets nearby and what is surrounding them. So that way there is amenities that are close to those developments. So that way people in those new developments don't have to travel a far distance away. And for schools specifically, it is also important that to look to see if the schools nearby have the ability to take in the number of students that are expected. And if not, it is important for the city council and with the school board to work with those developers to meet those needs, whether it be opening a new elementary school or any secondary school as well, making sure that there is no overcrowding of the current schools that are there, and making sure that if anything does need to be added to the surrounding areas, whether that be schools or any other services, that those needs are met.
I'm just going to make one brief commentary. I don't want either of you to answer it, but I'm just going to state factually that Fremont Unified right now is in a declining enrollment situation, and particularly in the Mission San Jose area. So it certainly raises the question of, are we pricing our parents and families out of Fremont? And so that's part of our challenge here. And it will lead to the next question, which is housing, whether market rate or deed restricted affordable housing, is very expensive. Fremont actually leads the way in the Bay Area in terms of impact fees it imposes on housing. And that's something that gets passed through to the buyers and certainly adds to the level of subsidization that's required for tax increment financing for our subsidized affordable housing projects that Abode and Mid-Penn and Eden build in our wonderful city. What specific policies would you champion, whether at the city, regional, or state level, that would reduce housing costs? And I believe the question should go to you, Bryce, first. So go ahead.
I think it's important to recognize that there is an oversupply by about 350% of at-market rate housing, with Marina being meeting less than 33%. And so we have to continue to get funding and build on multi-unit housing, especially near transit. For that, I'm in favor of reforming Prop 13. So that we can work to increase funding in that aspect, as well as dense mixed use housing near transit as well. It's in order to meet the housing needs over the next 8 years, I believe it's about 13,000 affordable housing units need to be built. And so in order to meet those needs, we really need to start taking an aggressive approach when it comes to building affordable housing and doing what we can to to get funding for those. With new laws that have been passed, including parking eliminations for those that are near transit, I believe that that'll help when it comes to what we can do in terms of building near affordable housing near transit now that we don't have to worry about parking minimums. And so I definitely think we need to start taking a very aggressive approach in order to meet the number of units that are needed over those next 8 years to meet those 13,000 affordable housing units.
Yay.
To me, when I just got elected to the city council, I noticed that in the past, when developers were given the choice of either developing affordable housing units or paying in lieu fees, they all choose in lieu fees. That's something wrong about it. So starting from my first year on the city council, I was trying to push for the increase of in lieu fees so that financially, that would encourage more and more developers to include affordable housing in their development. And that's what I did. I voted for the highest suggested $44 per square feet by the Nexus report by the staff. So that we can encourage developers to build more affordable housing units. In terms of reducing the cost of building, actually in our neighboring city, San Jose, they use pre-manufactured mini houses and or they call mini homes. That would dramatically lower down the cost. And that's something that we should look into. Besides, I agree that we should develop smartly. We can build high density units around the transportation hubs and taking into consideration of reducing the parking space as a part of our approaches.
I noticed that our AC Transit representative, Diane Shao, was watching last night. Maybe she's here tonight, and she didn't ask this question, but I do think it raises the question of looking at alternative transportation. We're all dealing with increased traffic circulation on our streets in Fremont. And there was something called a transportation demand management plan that's required in certain areas, but not citywide, that forces the home builder to account for trying to mitigate the traffic impacts of its project on traffic, and really encourages a much more proactive approach to addressing those needs. So my question to you, Yang, first, and then to Bryce is, do you think that we should have a transportation demand management plan be required for all future residential projects in Fremont?
I'm very familiar with such programs. For example, the future residents will be given monthly discount or allowance for their ridership on BART or local train, commuter trains and buses and so on. That certainly would encourage people to use more and more of the public transportation. Needless to say, during the pandemic, the ridership of BART dropped to historically low. And there's still no sign of quick recovery. And that puts us into a situation where, on one hand, we would rely on the ridership to go up so that the affordable housing units built around the transportation hubs are appealing to people. But on the other hand, we do have a lot of local policies where they would, for example, the public health policies that would discourage people from taking public transportation. So what I see is we need to work together with AC Transit, with BART and other organizations so that we can join efforts to solve this issue.
Bryce.
Could you do me a favor and repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, simply stated, transit demand management plans are not required for all projects. Would you institute that citywide, and what would you see as the advantage of doing so if you believe it should apply to all new projects?
I do believe that it should apply to especially large-scale projects or large-scale developments to make sure that it's because traffic is a huge aspect, especially with building developments, because that brings in more people, which will bring in more vehicles, especially to those areas. And so making sure that there's a plan in place to make sure that there's an ease of flow of traffic, enough entries and exits to those neighborhoods. So that way there isn't large traffic buildup, and that is especially true around areas where new schools are being built, to make sure that there isn't traffic backing up in those areas, and as well as making sure that there is a public transit, enough public transit in those areas as well, so that riders that are choosing to take public transit have that option, and there is enough, whether it be AC transit for buses, if there's a BART station nearby, making sure that those are readily available in those new developments.
I'm going to ask maybe one or two more, maybe two more prepared questions. I only have a handful of audience participation questions that we got in advance, and I only think I've seen one tonight. So this is the time to begin asking them. We're going to go to the rapid or lightning round questions, which will be very lightning fast. So we're going to transition a little bit, but I wanted to ask a question that really is a hot button issue that does relate to somewhat to the issue of the balance between new housing and the impact on vehicle miles traveled, which is the proliferation of bike lanes. Do we have too many bike lanes? And what is your position on the number of bike lanes that seem to be at all of our major intersections throughout Fremont? So Bryce, take on the bike lane issue. That's the thing that I hear about on the street. That's the #1 issue, and I'm not even running for office. So go ahead.
I do agree that I hear a lot of people talk about this issue a lot, both for and against it. Personally, I am in favor of the bike lanes. I believe that they're an aspect of public safety that is greatly important, making sure that people and students, even on their way to and from school, are safe while doing so. And so I believe that bike lanes, especially on major roads, are critically important. I'd actually like to see them more along on Mission Boulevard, because I see a number of students riding their bikes along that in the morning, even on my way to work at Mission San Jose High School. And so I am in favor of keeping, especially the ones that we have, and expanding on the bike lanes in areas where it is deemed that they are needed for the protection of bicycles.
Yang.
I'm very glad that the city of Fremont adopted Vision Zero even before I joined the city council. And it has been shown that it did a great job in reducing the carbon footprint and also reducing the casualty or death from all the traffic accidents. Needless to say, I see more and more people using the bike lanes. However, there cons to those bike lanes. For example, it's very hard for the city to clean the street. And also for drivers, it's very hard for them to get used to the bike lanes, especially when they try to make the right turns. And I've seen traffic accidents resulting from that, which means that the city has to make greater efforts to educate the drivers to the new setup for the bike lanes. Also, by saying that the bike lanes have a lot of benefits, we don't have to just use the same rule on all parts of the city. For example, recently, I voted no to adding a widened bike lane and reduce the lane part of Paseo Padre. That is because of the needs of the people from the neighborhood. And I think as a city council member, I always have to listen to them in order to make the right decision.
We're going to now go to our lightning round, and these really call for yes or no questions. But before I do the first one, I think it's important to define terms that ask about ministerial approval. Ministerial approval means that it could be over the counter if certain criteria are met. It means there's no public hearing, no appeal from the planning commission at the city council. And it is a way of trying to expedite processes. So my first question, Yang and then Bryce, yes or no? Do you believe in streamlined ministerial approval for housing that meets all of Fremont's zoning and development standards?
No.
Bryce?
Yes.
And the second one, do you support rezoning high resource areas near transit to allow for more missing middle housing? Bryce,
Yes.
Yang?
Yes.
Do you support pre-approved duplex designs to help more Fremont homeowners use SB 9, which we talked about previously? Yang,
No.
Bryce,
Yes.
do you support good cause eviction requirements for mobile homes? And good cause means that there has to be a reason before you can remove somebody from a mobile home. Bryce,
Yes.
Yang,
Yes.
do you support rent stabilization and eviction protections beyond those established as a baseline now in California law under what's called AB 1482, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019? Yang,
Yes.
Bryce,
Yes.
mixed income residential development on the Fremont BART parking lot. Are you for, do you favor that? Bryce,
Yes.
Yang,
No.
do you support expanding the transit-oriented district overlay radius beyond a half a mile? Yang,
No.
Bryce,
Yes.
inclusionary zoning on-site affordable. Do you support more inclusionary zoning on-site affordability in our projects? Bryce,
Yes.
Yang,
Yes.
do you support requiring an increase in the minimum of housing percentage of affordable housing, whether for in lieu fees or impact fees or for on-site development? Yang,
Yes.
Bryce.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm going to now try and ask some of the questions that we've gotten from the audience. And they are, and I would like it as it relates to some of our housing initiatives in a little bit more broadly viewed. One question from an audience, and I think the backdrop for this is that we have a disproportionate number of people that are LGBTQ, particularly young children, that have been excluded from their homes that are suffering from homelessness or experiencing homelessness. Do you make commitments to include having inclusive policy making, including specifically housing policy and other policy that takes into account sexuality and gender identity? Yang.
Is that a yes or no question?
No, it isn't. Actually, thank you. Very fair. Let me rephrase it. Let's start the clock again. We're now back out of the lightning round to a minute and a half, and I'll ask the question again so you can have a 90-second response. It's not a yes or no question. I apologize. So would you commit to inclusive policy making based on sexuality and gender identity as a factor to consider? And Yang, you have 90 seconds.
Sure. When I was running for city council in 2018, I already made a statement in a forum similar to tonight's platform, saying that since Fremont is a compassionate city, if or when I get elected, I will make sure that Fremont is an inclusive city, and we have no tolerance for any xenophobia, homophobia, or any other hates. As a matter of fact, we know not only certain communities experienced discrimination during the pandemic, there's a surge of anti-Asian hate. As an API candidate, I not only need to continue to keep Fremont inclusive, I would also be an advocate for any efforts or movement to stop anti-Asian hate, so that in terms of the policies that we make and also the approaches we take, we have to keep the equality and also make Fremont not only compassionate, but also inclusive.
Bryce.
I have always and always will be somebody who advocates for the LGBTQIA+ community. Just as I have done as an educator in my classroom, I make sure that I know that everybody is welcome in my classroom, no matter who they are or who others may perceive them to be. It's important that all of the policies that would come before me are inclusive of everybody, and that they do not discriminate anybody because of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their race, their ethnicity, or any other factors. And so it's important that we build a very inclusive community for everyone. And I have always done that in my classroom, and that is exactly what I hope to do on the city council.
This is an audience question. It may or may not take 90 seconds, but maybe you can expand on simply answering it one way or the other. Will you work to get state and federal funds to help with homeless housing and services? And I'm going to direct this first to Bryce.
I definitely believe that any state or federal funds that become available to help with housing is something that we should jump right on. Just as the city council has attempted to do with the Home Key program, to get about $40 million to purchase the Motel 6 to provide 156 units of permanent supportive housing. Unfortunately, the latest application that was sent in failed, as we found out in July, and so that is further setting back that aspect of being able to get those units available. But I definitely believe that any funding that does become available that we can utilize in any aspect is important, that we utilize those funds to keep as much of our city budget intact by using outside funding.
Yang.
As I was participating in the timing count this February, I had a very pleasant talk with people working in both the police department and the human services department. And I realized that in order to have an effective response to the local homelessness, we need to not only have the enforcement, but also resources. And talking about resources, we have to rely on federal, state, and county grants. Let me give you an example. Out of the $17 million of the funds to fund a program called Keep Fremont Housed. Basically, it's a rental assistance, a rent assistance program. That fund actually comes from the federal and state emergency rental assistance program called ERAP. Also, we have the federal community development block grant. And in the past, we used much of that grant for not only the homeless people, but also for the Afghan refugees that came to United States last year and this year. So the history already passed showed that by getting such grants, we can expand our services to the needed.
Bryce's response actually prompted another question I think is worth asking here. And I'll be directed first to you, Yang, which is the project Home Key failed. We missed out on state funding. Now, I realize that that's really been driven at the staff level. The council never really formally got a chance to approve a project other than to give direction in general for supporting it. But it did fail, and all the cities around us up and down the state are getting funding for Project Home Keys. We didn't happen to do it. Would you support evaluating and asking staff to explain in open session why it failed, what lessons can we learn, and perhaps even doing an audit of other available sites so that we can be able to position ourselves better to secure that funding? There's literally, I think, almost $1 billion out in the state level for it, and we managed not to get any of it. So Yang, would you be a little bit more aggressive about trying to evaluate how we can be eligible and learn from the lessons of why we didn't get the funding this go around for Project Home Key, and learn from that?
My voting records proved that I showed full support for the Home Key project, and it was unfortunate that we did not get the fund, which means it doesn't mean that we will never get the fund, because those funds come in on different rounds. If we fail this round, we still have a chance for the next round. And needless to say that we certainly need to find out the exact reason why the application failed. It may not be at the city end. Maybe it is just the black box at the federal, at the state end. But we will still try to do our best to apply for that fund in the future. But I have to point out is that while we're trying to introduce more such programs, we have to gain the support of local residents, because after all, by joining the efforts, we can make the program more effective. So I would encourage the city staff to do more outreach activities to the community so that we can not only introduce this program to the city, we can also, by joint effort, make sure it works and really help those who are housed in the home key projects.
Bryce.
So as I said, that it's 156 units of permanent supportive housing that is now being delayed. And so I think it's very sad to see that it wasn't approved. Actually on the city website, it says that the application was denied to financial information by the city's co-applicant, Shangri-La Industries, did not meet certain requirements. And so I think it's unfortunate that who the city decided to bring in as a co-applicant was the reason that it was denied, and they were given the option over the course of 5 days to attempt to appeal the decision, but they decided that it wasn't worth it, and decided to just wait for a later round. In 2015, the city set a goal of about 5,500 total units over the next so many years, and since then, only 34% of those goals have been met for very low-income housing. And so, a number of those people during that time may have become homeless, especially during the pandemic. And so, there's definitely a need for projects like this to move forward. And I do believe looking into other sites that could be more feasible and possibly a shorter period of time, if possible, is worth it, and possibly applying for home key programs on multiple fronts if possible to try and get the maximum amount of permanent supportive housing.
Thank you.
That we can make.
Thank you. This question was more generally about climate change and what initiatives will you propose? I'm going to modify it slightly to say, how is a strategy to provide more affordable housing and more rooftops near transit part of your vision in either assisting or perhaps impairing our goals of meeting carbon gas emissions reductions that we set for ourselves as a city? And so, Bryce, talk about the relationship, if you see any, between our housing policy and meeting our climate goals citywide and regionally in Fremont.
Are we still talking about the affordable housing aspect of that? Because you mentioned that.
Any aspect of housing in general. Yeah, just housing in general. How does that either further or hinder meeting our carbon, gas emissions reductions standards that we've set for ourselves locally and regionally?
Well, I'd certainly say on an affordable housing aspect, we can, since with the city approving those aspects, we can make sure that we are putting in solar panels. We are making sure that it's as near close to as low as emissions used as possible in those aspects. And I think that's also important citywide. A majority of people agree that the that there is an environmental crisis going on that needs to be addressed, not only locally, but worldwide. And so making sure that any project that is approved is meeting certain standards that we can look at as a city to see what standards we would like to set for new developments that are going up, making sure that they're meeting certain standards, I think is an important aspect. So that way we are helping out our planet and championing aggressive approaches to climate change as much as possible.
Yeah.
Before I answer this question, I have to just go back to the original one about the home key project application. It is very obvious that it's not the city's fault. And so from that point of view, I don't think the city staff should try to find out what went wrong on their hand and then try to do a better job. I believe that learning from this round of application, and also depending on who is competing with us, for the same amount of money, I think it is still uncertain, even though we have perfect partners and we have done everything we can on the city side. There's still not a guarantee in the next round of application that we will get the fund. But having said that, we at least have to do our job, and the city staff did do their job in the last round. Now, going back to this question, I think to make Fremont more green, it's not only about the future affordable housing. Actually, it's all about the residents and businesses inside Fremont. We, as the city, already won the Beacon Award, the Platinum Award last year. And that was such an honor because we were leading all the cities in the US in that aspect. And that is a demonstration of our past policies and the joint effort of all the stakeholders in Fremont.
Very good. I'm going to ask one question that's slightly off topic, but it's probably key to a lot of your District 4 residents. And it was an audience question, so I'll just ask it without editorialization. This will be our last question before we go into closing statements, assuming you use your time here. What plans do you have to revitalize the downtown Mission area? And Yang, it goes to you first.
I like the Mission downtown area because it's right at the foothill of Mission Peak. Mission Peak, as many people know, is the best place to visit for many Bay Area visitors. Therefore, a lot of people would come from outside the city to climb Mission Peak and then stay considerably long time in that neighborhood. So my proposal is that, first of all, we try to work with all the local businesses and try to see if we can open up more services. For example, restaurants, after they climb the Mission Peak, they come down for a brunch or lunch, and then later on, then they can certainly just increase foot traffic to the neighboring shops. That would also increase the exposure of the local business. The other thing is we have to work with the current property owners. For example, recently we have a local community activity to show that the city is working with the local property owners to build more or introduce more new buildings and new amenities to vitalize the business. So I think we have already done a study. Then the next step is to work with all stakeholders.
Thank you. Bryce.
I would actually say this is a topic where both Yang and I agree on. I have a lot of friends too that have, hiked up Mission Peak. I've done it myself as well. And I think it's great that it is draw-in for people from all across the Bay Area because they all want that picture, at the top that we all see posted on social media. And then so afterwards, for them to have the opportunity to, if having lunch or dinner, depending upon what time they go, being able to shop and support our local community, I think is great. And then there does need to be, I would say there does need to be some revitalization of the area, and trying to bring in more restaurants, more small business owners as well into that area to help support our local community more, and helping to streamline those aspects. That way, anybody that would like to open a business in new buildings or buildings that are currently unoccupied, just to help bring in that foot traffic and to bring in more people into our community.
Very good. Before I have you do your closing statements, I want to thank the Fremont for Everyone Policy Committee, Catherine Ruby, Vanita Verma, Lisa Dans, Annie Karuga, who's not here this evening, for helping and put together the questions, and more others that had input on the questions that we asked, and For all the audience members that came here this evening, thank you for participating and asking audience questions. I think this has been highly informative. And with that, before we say good evening, I'll allow Bryce and then Yang to have 90-second closing statements. So Bryce, go ahead with your closing statement.
First off, I'd like to thank Fremont for everyone again for hosting this forum on housing and the unhoused this evening. Let me start off by saying, as I've said before, I'm a public school educator. I always have the public and especially our students in mind as I interact with them every day. Some aspects that I'm looking to bring to the City Council includes increased cooperation between the City Council and the school board trustees, increasing affordable housing, especially near public transit, supporting local businesses, making sure that their business models are working for them and that they're drawing in customers to their businesses, as well as housing and career development for our unhoused community, making sure that after we bring them into our programs that they are able to sustain themselves afterwards, and then also protecting our environment. I am proud to say that I have the official endorsement of the Democratic Party, as well as the South Alameda County Young Democrats, the Southern Alameda County Progressive Democrats, as well as local leaders such as Fremont Council Member Jenny Casson, former Council Member Vinnie Bacon, and the chair of the Fremont Planning Commission, Robert Dalton. So if you'd like to learn more about me and my campaign, my website is vote.brycebeckel.com. And I hope and I would be honored to earn your vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang.
Thank you, Fremont, for everyone for having me tonight. I really enjoy the questions raised by the audience. Hopefully my response would help you make decision to support me in the upcoming election. I don't even want to start my list of endorsement because it's too long. Please visit my campaign website, electyangshao.com, to see the details. What I have to tell you is this. In the past 4 years, I never forgot that I was elected to fight for you, which I did. And housing and response to homelessness is always one of the priorities that I worked hard for, which can be backed up by my voting records. And also all the programs that I voted and supported and worked with fellow council members to make sure they worked. In the future, my priority is still public safety, response to homelessness, and financial stability and sustainability. As you know, Fremont has been ranked the happiest city 4 times in the past 5 years. I cannot take all the credit, but at least by keeping Fremont fiscally stable while providing all kinds of services to the needy showed this is the right way to go, not specifically, not limited to housing. So I will keep doing that in the future.
Thank you both. And this concludes our candidate forum sponsored by Fremont for Everyone. The election is on November 8th. You have to live in District 4 to vote for either Bryce or for Yang Shao. Look at your website. There's on the City of Fremont website, there's a locator if you not sure which district you live in. But wherever you live in Fremont, support whichever candidate you most like and help them get elected and walk precincts. And as we heard last night, democracy is not a spectator sport. We need everybody to be engaged. And for those of us here this evening, we are, and we thank the candidates for hearing our questions and responding to them. So with that, I wish everyone a good day, a good evening, and good luck.